There was once a man who lived in a small village nestled between two mountains. He was known for his temper, a fire that burned so brightly it often left him and those around him scorched. His name was forgotten over time, but his story was not. He was a blacksmith, a craftsman of iron and flame, and his hands were as rough as the tools he forged. But his heart was a furnace, always on the verge of eruption. One day, a traveler came to the village, a monk with a calm demeanor and eyes that seemed to hold the stillness of a deep lake. The blacksmith, as was his way, scoffed at the monk's presence. "What use is a man who does nothing but sit and breathe?" he muttered to himself. But the monk, unbothered, set up a small tent at the edge of the village and began to meditate. Days turned into weeks, and the blacksmith's curiosity grew. He would pass by the monk on his way to the forge, watching as the man sat motionless, his face serene, his breath steady. The blacksmith couldn't understand it. How could someone sit so still, so unbothered, while the world burned around them? One evening, after a particularly frustrating day at the forge, the blacksmith stormed over to the monk. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice sharp as the blades he crafted. The monk opened his eyes slowly, as if waking from a dream, and smiled. "I am listening," he said simply. The blacksmith frowned. "Listening? To what? There's nothing to hear but the wind." The monk's smile deepened. "Precisely," he said. The blacksmith was not satisfied. He wanted answers, not riddles. "You sit here day after day, doing nothing. What good does it do? What do you gain?" The monk tilted his head, studying the blacksmith with a gaze that seemed to pierce through his anger. "What do you lose when you rage?" he asked. The blacksmith opened his mouth to retort but found no words. He turned and walked away, his mind a storm of confusion and frustration. That night, as he lay in bed, the monk's question echoed in his mind. What did he lose when he raged? He thought of the broken tools, the shattered friendships, the nights spent alone, his anger a barrier between him and the world. He thought of the fire that consumed him, leaving nothing but ashes in its wake. The next morning, he returned to the monk. "Teach me," he said, his voice quieter now, less certain. The monk nodded and gestured for him to sit. "Close your eyes," he instructed. The blacksmith hesitated but obeyed. "Breathe," the monk said. "Feel the air enter your body, and feel it leave. Do not try to control it. Simply observe." The blacksmith tried, but his mind was restless, his thoughts racing like sparks from a flame. He grew frustrated and opened his eyes. "This is pointless," he said. The monk shook his head. "It is only pointless if you expect it to be something other than what it is. You are not here to achieve anything. You are here to be." The blacksmith frowned but closed his eyes again. This time, he focused on the monk's words. He breathed in, and he breathed out. Slowly, the storm in his mind began to settle. Days turned into weeks, and the blacksmith continued to sit with the monk. He learned to observe his anger, to see it not as something to be fought or suppressed, but as something to be understood. He began to notice the patterns of his emotions, the way they rose and fell like the tides. He saw how his anger was often a mask for deeper feelings, fear, pain, loneliness, and as he sat in silence, he began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: peace. One day, The monk announced that he would be leaving the village. The blacksmith felt a pang of sadness but also gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. The monk smiled. "You have always had the tools within you," he said. "You just needed to learn how to use them." The blacksmith returned to his forge. But he was no longer the same man. He still felt anger, but it no longer controlled him. He would pause, breathe, and observe the emotion as it passed through him, like a cloud across the sky. He began to craft not just tools, but works of art, each piece a reflection of the balance he had found within himself. The villagers noticed the change in him. They saw the calm in his eyes, the gentleness in his hands. They came to him not just for his craftsmanship, but for his wisdom, and though he never claimed to be a teacher, his life became a lesson. A reminder that the greatest battles are fought not with fists or swords, but within the quiet spaces of the heart. Years later, when the blacksmith was an old man, a young boy came to him, his face red with anger. "Teach me," the boy said, his voice trembling. The blacksmith smiled and gestured for him to sit. "Close your eyes," he said. "Breathe." And as the boy obeyed, the blacksmith saw in him the reflection of his younger self, a fire waiting to be tamed, a storm waiting to be stilled. He knew the journey would not be easy, but he also knew it was possible, for he had learned that the path to emotional mastery was not about extinguishing the fire, but about learning to tend it, to let it burn brightly without consuming everything in its path. And so, he sat with the boy, breathing in and out, teaching him the most important lesson of all, how to be.